We're coming from New York. We're really happy. And we're going to start the program in a bit. We just wanted to invite you to all partake of your lunch and get to know your neighbors a little bit, because part of the whole purpose here is not just presentations, but networking and connecting with each other. So please, feel free to start. Greetings again. Can you all hear me? Hello, hello, hello. We're going to start our presentations now. Hi. Okay, back from my camp counselor days. Okay. Anyway, welcome again. I hope you enjoyed your lovely lunch. And just a few words before we start the program. Again, just on behalf of the ARF, we're thrilled to have you here. And I don't know how much you know about women in analytics. I know some of you have joined us before. For some of you, it's your first time. We started this about 2 years ago, really a couple things in mind. One was to evangelize female leadership, and the other is to create very much of a peer networking model. And I think we've done that. We've now held, I believe, almost 6 events across the country. And are planning for more. Our next one's going to be in New York in November. And today we're just so excited to have 4 amazing women leaders in the industry, spanning from data science to more insights, to talk about their journeys from data to insights. But I wanted to say a few words, and all of these women in analytics events would not be possible with our friends at Kantar, Oracle Data Cloud, and Twitter. Sorry, the Twitter logo is a little dark in this room, but it's Twitter. Really, your support, you do much more than just give us some monetary support. You help us with the programming and ideas, and we're truly thankful. And with that, there is one more person, and these are actually the women I was mentioning, but we'll get to them very soon. Bin Yu, Carolyn Wu, Tammy, not Tamara, and Christina. But I'd like to introduce my boss, who started at the ARF either the very end of February or the beginning of March. The date's up for grabs. So Scott McDonald's president and the CEO of the ARF, and has had over 30 years of market research experience, most notably at a couple of the big global media companies, Time Inc. and Condé Nast, and I'm sure there's more. And you also have a PhD in sociology from Harvard, and you teach at Columbia Business School. And you're passionate about a lot of things, but I think including what we're doing here today. So with further ado, it's up to you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And again, thank you to the sponsors, and thank you to the gods for this beautiful, beautiful weather. So just a little bit of setup. I mean, I'm obviously pretty new at the job here. Can take no credit for the organization of this event. So thanks to the ARF staff for putting all of that together. It does seem to me that what we're about with the Women in Analytics effort at the ARF is something that's pretty responsive to items that are in the news. Both, the big headlines in the news, of course, most recently have been around pretty spectacular, sensational things like the firing of Bill O'Reilly, sexual harassment in the workforce. When you go a little deeper and look at some of the statistics around how well we're doing at moving toward gender equality in the United States, it's still not a very good story, I'm afraid. And it doesn't really even stop at inequality of outcomes, but also really of opportunities. There is a persistent disparity in pay. And the current estimates that I'm seeing are about that on average women across the population are earning 22% less per hour than men. And that's even controlling for experience, for education, location, and the other things that might be a factor. There still are very well-established occupational ghettos for women, nursing, teaching, things of that sort that just pay less. So it'll affect the aggregate statistics across the whole workforce. But the pay gap actually widens at higher levels of occupation and at higher levels of education. At the very top of the corporate ladder, if you go up to the 95th percentile of the wage distribution, a woman is earning 74 cents on the dollar at that. So that's even wider than the 22% figure across the whole thing. McKinsey last year released a report indicating that women are 15% less likely to be promoted. So it's not just pay gaps, it's also opportunities to move up. And they calculated that at that rate, it would take about 100 years, about 1 century, to get to gender equity in the executive ranks. So that's just not good enough. And so there are a lot of things to be done. This is, I think, a relatively modest effort of trying to just encourage and share experiences and provide some networking and some cheerleading. But, you know, at some point, we really have to, as Bin Yu, who I will introduce in a moment, indicated, you know, you got to get some men and some executives in the room as well, and actually try and engage. And if you really want to tackle it, you got to go a little farther in. And then, of course, back to the headlines, we've had, you know, a lot of accounts of inequality and opportunity in Silicon Valley, and really in the field that we're talking about here in data analytics.
Well, Otis switches this out. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I can bring the mic around. But I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Caroline Wu, Senior Strategy Director at Kantar Added Value. We found out that we grew up in neighboring neighborhoods in Southern California. It's always nice to find someone from the San Gabriel Valley. And Caroline is a brand strategy expert who loves to take on disparate information and find a way to tell a compelling story. And she's had experience both in brand and business strategy, working with consumers within the CPG, technology, travel, media, and entertainment. She has a BA in international relations and an MA in sociology from Stanford. And she's here to talk to us about, in a sea of data, how to be drenched without drowning.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for that. Today I'm talking about, in a sea of data, how to be drenched without drowning. So first of all, why do we use so many water analogies for data? We talk about swimming in data, thirsty for data, data deluge, and flooded with data. So they're both things that we want just the right amount of. Taken extremes, they can both be very dangerous. If you have too little, not enough water means you're in a drought. Not enough data might mean you don't have enough information to make good decisions. And if you have too much, water could mean flooding, or it can mean an overabundance of data that might leave your head spinning and give you some analysis paralysis. But water and data are both things that we want to control and manipulate. And used properly, they can be both powerful and valuable. So first, a little story about surfing and the difference between drowning and drenched. So I'm going to tell a little story first about my first experience surfing. This was in Bondi Beach in Australia, and I decided on a whim to take a surf lesson. Now, normally I'm more of a magazine and drinks by the pool kind of gal, but I saw all these happy people bobbing on the water, and I thought, I'm going to learn how to do that. So I took a 1-hour lesson with about 20 other people, and I remember hearing some terms like duck dive and turtle roll, and then the instructor pretty much sent us out to sea. Now, truth be told, I was only half listening to the instructor, and I was really daydreaming about how awesome I was going to look on my board that day. So let's say at one point I was supposed to do a turtle roll, and instead I went straight into the wave. The board, of course, flipped over, and I went under, and I almost drowned. So that's what drowning looks like. You'd think after experience like this, I would probably avoid surfing for the rest of my life, but I got older and wiser and decided I wanted to tackle it another time. So this time, I was in Costa Rica. I decided I was going to hire a private instructor. I was going to actually listen to him when he talked to me. And I told him I had a goal, and my goal was to be able to stand up on the surfboard. So I listened to him, and I went in and had a mental checklist, which included things like wait for the perfect wave, paddle super duper hard, push up with your arms, and jump to surf stance. And lo and behold, I'm proud to report I was able to stand up and catch a wave that time. So that's drenched. So I learned some pretty important lessons that day that apply to both surfing and research. Number 1, don't just dive in head first. Number 2, decide exactly what it is that you want to accomplish. Number 3, outline the steps that you need to take. And number 4, determine what constitutes success. I mean, you might be wondering what surfing has to do with research, but essentially the principles I learned that day apply just as well. For instance, you could have 2 companies with equal amounts of research. One is just drowning in data, feeling overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with it, whereas the other one knows exactly what to do with it, how to mobilize it, and how to drive the business value that the company is looking for. So no question about it, we are absolutely swimming in a huge abundance of staggering data. IBM estimates there's going to be 2.5 billion gigs were generated in 2012, and mobile phone penetration is also growing, for instance, from 61% of the global population in 2013 to 70% by 2017. So we can see that data is just going to explode. And jobs with data analytics have also grown exponentially, which is wonderful for all of us in the room. SHRM estimates that these jobs requiring data capability analytics are going to skyrocket in the next decade. But the question remains, what do we do with all of this data? How do we make sense of it? And how do we make sure we're not just capturing all the data, but we're interpreting it, we're telling a story with it, and we are creating true business value? What clients really need these days are storytellers who can drive action. We've got a great quote here from one of our clients who said, "We are awash in data, but if you have the right people who are able to analyze a story and tell the so what and bring it to life through videos and presentations, this helps people stay focused and helps them understand what's important." So in one case, it wasn't that our client didn't have too much data, not enough data. In fact, they had too much. They needed to pinpoint the right information. They needed someone to help them connect the dots. And they needed a way to find a way to tie the insights to action, which in this case meant driving sales. So lesson number 1, don't just dive in head first. This is possibly the most important lesson that I learned from surfing. Just as it's so tempting to just jump into those crystal waves without first taking a moment to survey the landscape and think through your actions, it's the same with research. You might be raring to go in terms of wanting to write the survey or create the discussion guide, but take a moment and stop and think about what your objectives are. In Kantar Added Value's case, one thing we like to do is to kick off projects with a hypothesis work session so that we can explore with our clients the direction that they want to take and make sure that we're not making some incorrect assumptions. So before diving in, even writing a single survey question, we need to ask, what do we know and what do we need to know? This might include data review. For instance, there have been times we've looked at over 500 pages of documents to ascertain the lay of the land. Look for opportunity themes. So a lot of times we hypothesize themes ahead of time about what we think might be happening, what we're inspired from our data review, as well as broader societal, environmental, and technological trends. And basically, we want to fill in the knowledge gaps. Research real estate, as we all know, is such a premium. We want to be laser sharp when we're including the most relevant questions. Lesson number 2, decide exactly what it is that you want to accomplish. Our client wanted answers to some of their most pressing questions. For instance, how can we understand our brand and who our consumers or heavy users are? We look at point of sale data on both a daily or weekly basis, but it doesn't always tell you the why. You need both pieces to marry. You need to understand attitudes as well as underlying needs. How can we use insights and analytics to drive action? How do we embed data and insights into a category growth story for our retailers? And how do we deliver compelling customer sales presentations so that we can partner with our retailers and gain buy-in and support for both our brands and products, with the ultimate goal of increasing household penetration and sales by a target amount? So for one client, we succeeded by going from a vague desire for a segmentation study to answering lots of questions to the number 1 priority that they had of developing category growth story with a focus on delivering compelling presentations for their customers. And that's what oriented a lot of the decisions that we made when we were designing the process. Lesson number 3, outline the steps you need to take. What steps did we take? First, we started off with a consumer story. We created a compelling consumer story based on insights from our segmentation, demand spaces, and shopper behaviors. We connected the dots across variables to marry the what and the why. We formulated some growth drivers using consumer insights, census data, macro trends, and other data sources. We created a category and retailer vision for how the brand could drive category growth, as well as customized stories that were retailer specific. And lastly, we helped them create a cross-functional roadmap to help with organizational alignment. We conducted 3 distinct surveys to understand consumer, product, and shopping in-store behaviors, all linked together by an algorithm. So in our consumer segmentation, we looked at consumer typologies and demand spaces. We did a product study to identify drivers and barriers, as well as understanding what were some of the other product alternatives, as well as future intent to purchase. And then lastly, we did a shopper study. So this is where we looked at things like path to purchase. We looked at open versus decided shoppers. We looked at things like promotions and coupons and how that was affecting people's behaviors. We also combined a sales lens, which had profitability and incrementality, along with the consumer lens on brand, including perception, equity, and positioning to set the foundation for brand optimization. And we did this in partnership with our Kantar sister companies, Kantar Retail and Kantar Millward Brown. So this particular client had conducted commission studies from all of our companies, and we came in and actually helped them to connect the dots, particularly with this sort of performance and perception and the ability to combine what the consumer is thinking with how they're actually behaving. Next, we formulated growth drivers. A growth driver is any action that drives more consumers using more and using more often, and or more shoppers buying more often at a higher value. So we drew on these deep consumer insights and the picture we'd painted in the segmentation, and we created growth drivers that would help increase frequency and or penetration. So this was not the end of the journey, but it was definitely the step our client was most excited to see. We had conducted an earlier workshop where we came up with these growth drivers, which are basically big ideas that you can set for category growth. And underneath each growth driver, we had specific platforms. So as an example, if we were talking about, say, salad dressings, one of the growth drivers might be healthy dressing, and then platforms might be something like spritz-on dressing or dressing with protein. So we came up with a whole bunch of these platforms for our client. We then tailored the category vision and growth story for the priority retailers based on insights we knew about who their customer is, how they shop, and what's most important to them. So our clients were excited about the growth drivers and even more excited to share these growth drivers with their retailers, because then they could go in and speak to them about exactly how they were going to drive category growth for this particular retailer. As an example, we had one growth platform that was about aesthetics, which was a great fit for a retailer that was really interested in design and being fashion forward or trendy. Or another platform that we had for a retailer that was interested in low prices, they would likely perk up about an offering about great value. So these are some of the platforms. So number 4, determine what constitutes success. In this particular case, it was all about penetration. From the outset, that's how our client had defined success as increasing household penetration. So we're now designing tracking systems to show how this new strategy is indeed delivering on penetration. And what was the result? So our growth drivers were presented to the company president, who then incorporated them into the strategic plan, and they're serving as the foundation now for the 2017-18 strategic plans. We also used the growth drivers to underpin recommendations for them. So this included everything from innovation, e-commerce strategies and digital strategies, as well as brand harvesting. We did some brand portfolio optimization as well. And lastly, we're currently discussing follow-on projects for 2017. And our client had some nice words to say for us. They said, "Thanks so much for all the incredible work that you've delivered thus far on this huge initiative. This information is so valuable and important for our teams. The insights have been wonderful and new and really gotten the team aligned and excited about pushing forth the prioritized growth drivers. The engagement internally on this program is very high, and that is due to the fact that the deliverables are on point, actionable, and insightful. We appreciate everything you've done. So in conclusion, don't forget these 4 important lessons as you strive to make sense of your data. Don't just dive in head first. Decide exactly what it is you want to accomplish. Outline the steps you need to take. And determine what constitutes success so that you'll be drenched and not drowning in data.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, we're starting at the end, the last slide. This is going to be an adventure. Aha, got it. Okay. So thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. Like she said, I lead the measurement research group for Oracle Data Cloud. And what that means is we develop a lot of statistical models. So a lot of my day is spent helping my team figure out what models to build, but also helping everyone else in the organization, helping our customers understand what those models are. And everyone comes from a different background. It'd be nice if I could just talk to people who are like me all the time, but unfortunately that's not the way it is. And so what I've found is that analysts have their own language. You know, in some ways it's really nice because it's clear. We can speak to each other easily. It's fast. I can convey a really complex topic to someone very quickly. But it turns out if there's an exec wandering the halls by my team, this is more of what they see, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. We might as well be speaking a foreign language because what happens is not everyone speaks our language. And so how do I get my team to a place where they can talk to those execs wandering the hall? So that way, someone who's from a less technical background can stop by our group and understand everything that's going on so that they can learn and engage and give us feedback as well. And I think we've all been there. We've done a pretty killer analysis. We think we've figured out how to solve the problem. We have a boardroom full of people, and we announce our result, and we're literally met with this. Like, she's so bored, she got a phone from 1998. And I think part of the problem is we don't always know what our deliverable is. So I'll be the first to admit that I have maybe sent a PowerPoint like this before. I don't know, 25, 30, 40 columns, no formatting. It's probably titled results. And I maybe just said, let me know your thoughts. As I've gotten more senior, when I start getting these emails now, I just shake my head. Like, I don't know what to do with that. I've also sat in presentations where every single slide looks exactly the same. Just bar chart after bar chart, table after table. And the speaker is so excited. She's the one doing the splits, talking about her p-value, and I'm still stuck on, like, what's the difference between slide 3 and 6? What happened back there? Because the truth is, our deliverable is not a p-value. It's not the presentation. It's not the spreadsheet. It's what we want people to do with that information. So they need to do more or less of something. They need to start or stop something. They need to set up an experiment. And I think, especially as it relates to my team, the more complicated the analysis is, the more important that action as the deliverable is. And so we can fix it, because I hate seeing someone so excited about their result and met with 1998 cell phones. And so really what we need to do is to figure out how best to communicate our results so that way we end up with the happy faces. So I'm going to talk about a few things I've learned along the way that I think has helped transition my response from less of that side to more of that side. But this is still an area in progress for me. I don't think anyone's perfect at this, and this is just sort of things that I've picked up along the way. So the biggest one is to define the problem you're trying to solve. And this feels obvious. It feels like something we should all be doing. But I can't tell you how often I've walked into a room and assumed just because everyone saw the calendar invite, they knew what I was talking about. Everyone comes in having been in other meetings. Even if you sent an email 2 days before letting them know their action items and what we're planning to talk about, they don't remember. They've just had 6 other meetings. And so this is a true story. My team had done some amazing work, and in 6 months, we'd built 5 new features to release. We were super excited about it, but that's also a big release for us. So there's a lot of sort of anticipation and nerves around the organization. And so I set a meeting with some of the higher level stakeholders to talk about what we found. And I forgot to tell them that that's what we were doing, that we were talking about what we found. So Robin Opie, I don't know if you guys are familiar with any of these people. Robin Opie is our VP of data science. And he and I had been going back and forth on, of those 5 features, one of them, we couldn't decide on the best method. We had 2 competing approaches. We liked both of them. We didn't know which one was best. And then he had a bunch of travel. I decided without him. Life moved on, and I never followed up with him. So he came in thinking we were talking about those 2 competing methods. He had no idea we were talking about the backtest. So by the 3rd slide, he was just totally lost. How is this relevant? What is she even talking about? This isn't even the problem we were trying to solve. Brenda Tuig was also in the room. She's our general manager of our CPG product group. Okay, so she thinks I'm talking about how we're going to convey all these new results and new deliverables for the clients. Okay, so she's not thinking backtest at all. And from slide 1, she's like, what is Tammy doing? That's not even our deliverable template. And so then Kevin Witcher's also in the room. He's our senior director of product. And he hangs with me a little bit longer, but that's only because he thinks I'm showing the slides that he thinks I'm going to show clients to explain the new results. Okay, so he at least thinks I'm showing results of backtests. He just doesn't know who the audience I mean to be speaking to is. And so maybe he makes it halfway through before he's like, why would we show that, Tammy? And so the truth is, that was my fault. All of that confusion was my fault. Because what I should have done is I'd come in and told them from the very beginning, we're going to step through these backtests, and what I want from you is I want you all to be comfortable with these changes so I can go and release this into production. And that doesn't mean they wouldn't have had these questions. Robin still would have said what happened to those 2 methods we were talking about, and Brenda still would say, hey, I haven't seen that deliverable. You can't release until I see it. And Kevin would have the same worries, but at least they'd understand the point I was trying to make. So that's the first lesson I've learned is you got to define the problem, even if it seems like everyone should be on the same page. The second is create your elevator pitch. And the idea behind an elevator pitch is if you only have an elevator ride to explain something to someone, what would you say? And so if I have done an analysis and I only have an elevator ride to explain it, what would I distill it down to? So in my case, it's really an elevator ride. I'm based out of Colorado. We take the stairs. There's a lot of fitness judgment in Colorado, if you haven't been there. So really, for me, it's more of a hallway conversation. You have from the office to the cafeteria to get your point across. And the person that this happens to me all the time with is this guy. This is Eric Rosa. He's our SVP. And if you don't know Eric Rosa, he also owns a CrossFit gym. He does not walk slowly. And so I ran into him in the hallway not too long ago. We were delivering a really important analysis for a key client, and he had heard through the grapevine that my team was done. And he said literally this. We're walking, and he said, Tammy, what'd you find? It's like I can see the cafeteria coming towards me, and I'm kind of deer in headlights because what we found was really, really interesting, but also really complex. And it wasn't simple, and I had, 20 steps, and we're walking so fast, I'm trying not to be out of breath to explain it to him. In that case, I was in a lucky position because I'd done the executive summary slide literally 10 minutes before. So I felt like I could at least get that across. But besides creating that executive summary slide, having that elevator pitch about your analysis does a couple things. So first, it's going to help me get to my recommended action. So I really wish I could tell you what it is. In this case, I can't tell you what it is for that example. But there was one. The other thing is, how did I get there? Because a lot of times, I'm saying that the action is the most important thing that we need to convey. Understanding the journey to how you came to that conclusion is also equally important, and particularly the pros and cons of that method. Because in any analysis, you're forced to make a lot of choices. And sometimes those can invalidate an analysis because you're forced to make it. And so all the stakeholders need to understand that. And then your challenge is to convey all 3 of these things in an elevator ride, or potentially running from one building to another with your SVP. Okay, so my last learning is to use the whiteboard. And I wish that this was some insight that just came to me and I was like, all of a sudden, people are going to understand me better because I use the whiteboard. The truth is, I was leading a methodology overview for new data scientists to the organization, and I didn't have any slides prepared. I was totally caught off guard. And so I wung it. I went in there and I was like, guess I'm going to wing it. And so I whiteboarded it. And our methodology is pretty complex. There's 10 steps, and at least 5 of them include graduate level statistics. And so it's not an easy thing for new hires to grasp. I mean, you barely understand what your boss's name is, who your coworkers are, and I'm writing equations on a whiteboard. It's pretty overwhelming. But what I found in using the whiteboard is that it was really easy to adapt to my audience. I could look at their face and I could say like, oh wow, that wasn't even close. Let me try again. Or I could see where I was losing them. I could see where they were bored. The other thing about that is you tend to be a little bit more casual in your presentation, and that makes you much more approachable. So if someone is confused, they're much more willing to ask the question and to stop you sort of where you are. Also, you have to go much slower. It takes time to write things on a whiteboard, and that's helping your audience out. Because when you have slides and you can just like zip through things really fast, it's easy to sort of skip over the vital points and not give people time to process. My boss is actually pretty amazing. He puts in ridiculous animations to every single one of his PowerPoints. We're talking like spinning things and like everything flying in and off the screen. And he does it specifically for that reason. Provides a little bit comic relief, but it also slows everything down. So that way people can really sort of sit and process. Because you don't want to sit up there and say a word and then sit back, and then say a word and sit back. Because they're going to be like, come on, Tammy, get to your point. But it's also, not everyone processes at the same speed. And then the last point is that some concepts are just easier without the restriction of slides. Like there's one particular part of this methodology where I can summarize it in a table that I draw on the board really well, and I have not been able to replicate that in PowerPoint yet. Maybe there's some PowerPoint gurus out there who can help me figure out the right way to do it, but I have not been able to figure out a way to convey it that goes slow enough, in enough detail, that people can grasp it the same way. So I just covered some three of the tricks that I've learned. As I said, this really is a work in progress for me. If you have other ideas about good ways to communicate, I'd love to hear them. And I know everyone has their own style, so what works for you? Thanks.
Changer Award, so proud about that. So let's hear from Christina about the power of storytelling, kind of a perfect segue from Tammy's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm going to put my water here. So I have had a little bit of caffeine, but you guys might have to like pep me up as we go. We'll see. It's really a privilege to be here and see so many amazing women and hear so many amazing stories. It's such a passion point for me. I've been involved in Women in Analytics with the ARF, Women in Research, which is another organization that's focusing on empowering women. And so I love hearing the challenges, some of the pain points, and just sharing learnings. So hopefully that's what I can do for some of you today. A little bit about me, and I'll gloss over that since I had a very nice introduction from Rachel, but I thought I would explain the context for my presentation, which might help some of you. So in my career, I have held either I was a researcher, I was a market researcher for a while, I was a media researcher. I worked alongside a lot of incredibly smart analysts. I led a team of researchers. But last year, I decided I wanted to move even further into the storytelling space and the creative space, and I moved into a marketing role. So my context and some of the lessons I've learned are actually build on some of the other presentations you've seen this morning or this afternoon, but it is more from a combined perspective of marketing and research and analytics. I'll start with just a sort of level set, and Caroline did such a great job of sharing so many stats about data and how much data is out there. But what I love about this definition is that these are factual pieces of information. And individually, they may not mean very much, but when you start to combine them together, hopefully what you get is information. And this is about knowledge. And I thought this was an incredibly powerful way of explaining what you all do, what we do in terms of turning data into actionable insights, which is ultimately what we want to have. And I thought this was great, this power of seeing into a situation and seeing intuitively. And the goal really is that with all this amazing data that we have, what we want to do is make a decision or persuade a decision maker in our business to make a decision, or maybe stop a decision that's already been made and we can prove that it's different, we should take a different direction. But the goal is really to focus on action and actionability. When I joined Twitter last fall, I had the ability to listen to our VP of product at the time talking about Twitter's product strategy moving into live streaming. And I'm not gonna do all of the research and analytics justice, but there were a couple of stats that stood out for me. So we had a number of users who were coming in through the mobile device. And we also found that 1 in 2 people were tweeting while they were watching television. And we also saw these spikes of conversation happening on Twitter about certain things in the world that actually had nothing to do with what the users were doing. It was about Super Bowl or about the presidential election or the debates. And so all of those different data points put together didn't really mean very much, but they ultimately sort of drove our product strategy to move more into this live streaming ability to see the conversation while also watching live. And so I think that's just a demonstration of the power of what we're all doing and the fact that understanding the data but really being able to turn that into an actionable insight is really the future. So I'll share 5 lessons. I feel like we've had 4, 3, and now we're going to have 5. So we'll ultimately confuse everybody here. I'll share 5 lessons from my perspective. Some of this is a little bit redundant in terms of what the other speakers have said, but I'll share kind of my perspective on that. And to make it a little bit more fun, I've done it in less than 140 characters, so you can tweet, all right? So I think some of these sound really simple when it talks about the learning, but actually in practice, it's really hard. And you guys know that. So what I'm about to share, these are all things that we know and that things that you're probably doing, but it's really incredibly hard. And the more we can practice and the more we can leverage each other and use each other's strengths, I think the more powerful it will be. All right, so my first lesson, identify the business problem. And I mean the business problem, not necessarily the research problem, because I do think the research or the analytical problem is sometimes different. And I think being able to write down this headline and then write down ideally what you'd love to see from your analysis and how that's going to influence the business. So asking yourself, who are my stakeholders? In some of our world, it's really complicated. Is it a product person? Is it a client? Is it a marketer? Is it the VP? Who am I actually trying to influence with this information and with this insight? What are they going to do? How are they going to use this information? And what actions should they ultimately take? And I often think of Tammy's, your meeting that you just explained, where you're like sitting there and you think everybody's on board and actually they have no clue. And I think as analysts and researchers, we often want to jump in and write our research objective without actually stepping back and thinking about what's the business problem I'm trying to solve? And if this is successful, what do I want my stakeholder to do? What action do I really want them to take? And I think this requires us to be whole brain thinkers. It requires us to have a lot more business acumen and be able to communicate. That was something that Ben talked about, that lack of communication, because we're talking about stats and someone else is talking about business metrics. And it also allows us to be storytellers. And a research study that was done by Millward Brown Vermeer a couple of years ago called Insights 2020 was really looking at companies that are driving customer-centric growth. And they looked at insights teams and found that these are really the 3 critical capabilities that people are looking for when they're looking for their insights teams to drive their business forward. And so I think having that whole brain thinking ability, the left brain and the right brain, and the ability to translate that into what's meaningful for the business is going to be so key as more and more data gets used and we have more data available and we really want to focus on the insight. The second takeaway is the analysis phase. And I'm guessing for most of you in the room, is this your favorite part? Right? This actually wasn't my favorite part, which is why I moved to marketing. So we'll come to that in a second. But the analysis phase, and having worked with a lot of analysts in my time, this is the most important phase to get right, but it also can take you down a ton of different directions that actually don't go back and solve the business problem. And so a couple of sort of, I guess, lessons I've learned is build in more time than you think you need to do the analysis. Like give yourself an extra few days, an extra week, whatever you think it's going to take, so you can just go out in and have a play around with the data, but it doesn't set you behind schedule in terms of a business objective you're trying to achieve. The other tip I would say is put some milestones or some guardrails in place. So if you know that you're one to really get lost in the weeds, you're going to find all these interesting insights and you just love it, put some time in with your teammate, your manager, do some checkpoints so that you ultimately stay true to that business problem you're trying to solve. And then you can go in and play with the data and do all kinds of cool stuff. The next lesson, and someone mentioned this before, but focus on the so what. And I think the so what is really the point where you take your data points and you actually turn them into insights, and then even go a step forward to make them actionable. This is where you have to understand your audience, and it may be different, right? If you're presenting to your own team and they actually want to know all the ins and outs versus presenting to a marketing person versus someone else in your business or a client, you really need to know what matters to them so that you can really make that so what so important. And I'll even go a step further to share one of my experiences. So one of my previous managers was so good at finding the so what. And he would do it like this. And I was like, how is he doing that? I must be missing something. And then I had the ability to work on a project with him. And I think we did about 40 or 50 iterations of our executive summary. And if you go back to the story I mentioned before, 1 in 2 people are tweeting while they're watching television. So what? Okay, let me think of another data point. What do I need? So you have to continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And what I think that ultimately does is it puts your actions and that executive summary into language that everyone can understand. It takes away the jargon and it simplifies it and it makes it really, really clear that this is the so what for that business or for that stakeholder. And that's really important to making sure that it doesn't get lost in the weeds. I've been involved in a couple of projects myself where it was really complex methodology and we didn't spend enough time getting to the so what, and it didn't get used. And then I've seen the flip side, which is we used really simple methodology and we had a great journey to get really clear so what and clear actions, and people still use it today. And it was like 5-6 years ago. So really spend time focusing on the so what and getting to that bottom line. And it's something that really takes practice, something you can do together with your teammates and your partners and your managers. The next lesson is storytelling. And I think this really stood out for me. There's a ton of different tips. I could have probably done a whole piece just on storytelling. But I think the power of storytelling really rides true with this stat. And this was some research that was done by Stanford University a few years ago, which says that data that's included in a story is 22 times more memorable than just facts and figures alone. So how do you really use those stories? Once you've got your so what, how do you actually use those stories to make that really meaningful and really powerful? And I think this is where you also need to know your audience and put them in your story. What are you going to bring? How are you going to make them keep that page turned? How are you going to bring them into that and make them a character in your story? I also think this is where sometimes as researchers or analysts, we're a little bit afraid to use our own voice. And that's because we definitely want it to be fact-based and data-based. But I think there's an opportunity for us to put our own point of view there and interpret that and make that more meaningful. And you all have a ton of experience bringing that forward and how you tell the story of the data, I think can be really, really powerful, both for you and your brand as well as for making it come to life for your stakeholder. And the last piece is don't underestimate the power of creativity. And I know as a researcher, analyst, turned marketer, you guys are all probably thinking, what do you mean? I'm not very creative. Or maybe you're thinking, oh yeah, I love data visualization. This is all about data visualization. Yes, there's a piece of that, and yes, this is a great time to partner with other folks in the organization. Maybe you're partnering with your own marketing departments, or there's just some really creative people on your teams that can help bring this to life. But recently, a friend at Twitter told us this story. We were doing a creativity exercise, and it really rang true for me what this actually means. And he was telling us this story about how he had been pitching to the senior person at this company. This was a while ago. And he was trying to convince them to do all these great ideas. And the president of the company kept saying, we don't have budget, we don't have budget. And it all came back to budget. And every time they built these ideas and they presented these ideas, it was all about budget. So I loved what he did. He went into this meeting, he thought about it with his team, and then went into the meeting and said, okay, there's one rule in this meeting, and that's every time you want to say budget, say xylophone. And he put a picture of the xylophone up on the slide, and it was suddenly incredibly apparent how often he was saying xylophone, xylophone. Oh, okay, yeah, I get it. So that's what I really mean by creativity. It can be something as simple as that to really drive your point home and drive your insight home. Or maybe it's you're working on a shopping study about coffee, and just go put yourself in a coffee shop and see what it's like. Experience whatever client's product you're working with and put yourself in those shoes. And I think that can actually help you bring that story to life in a much more powerful and creative way. So 5 lessons. Hopefully you guys tweeted some of these because they were less than 140 characters. Don't forget to make sure you identify the business problem, not just the research or the analysis objective, and really focus your analysis on finding out and discovering what the answer to that problem is. And then build time in to go into the so what to really understand the actionable insights that